a grade is not just a grade anymore. Can be the determining factor to how much you make and how comfortable of a life that you can have. And that should never be allowed. And I think that that's an inherent flaw in the system.
But this idea that, okay, someone who's achieved that high of a grade to get into honors, then to get into the masters is going to be a good psychologist. Trust me, there's some people that I did my undergrad with that I'm very scared.
To be able to be creative and self-express, you need risk. You need to be able to fail. And if the risk of you failing is getting yelled at by your parents, not progressing to the next semester, not progressing to a bachelor or an undergrad, you are just going to play it safe. And not allowing for all of this choice means that you have a system of punishment for a bad grade, and it does honestly nothing besides impact self-esteem and promote unhealthy behaviors to achieve a good grade.
It destroys that enthusiasm for activities that we actually genuinely enjoy and want to do in our lives. If someone has to give you an external motivating factor to complete a task, you would think that there is something inherently wrong with that task.
Yep.
We all know racism exists, and then we keep attaching it to unconscious bias.
Yep.
But we've just established that it exists, and we all know it exists. So what is unconscious? We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and Wadamadigal people of the Darug Nation, whose land on which we record today, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners with us today. We want to remember also that sovereignty was never ceded and a treaty was never signed. This is really important to acknowledge all the time. So just before we begin the podcast, we do want to talk about a few campaigns and causes that we're quite passionate about. I just want to bring your attention to. First, for me, like many of you will know of this campaign if you're in Australia, on the topic of raise the age. So we have this really big problematic issue that where we see children as young as 10 being arrested by police and being locked up and put away into prison at such a young age. And unfortunately, this disproportionately impacts Indigenous children and has been since invasion. And there has been some movement and some change in regards to this, but it seems to be that people only pay attention to it at specific points in time. So we see now that there are territories in Australia, such as the ACT or Australian Capital Territory as it's known, are moving towards actually changing this and actually raising the age to 14, which is the recommended age that a lot of advocates and people who work in this space are really pushing for. However, like I said, it's been on the low across the board in Australia, and we just completely seem to forget about it and only address it on the International Day of like Children or whatever it's called. Like, we don't bring it to the forefront. There has been a greater increase of young people in prisons who are at greater risk of several different mental health challenges because we continue to put children at such a young age into prisons. It's really important that we bring and garner enough support for this campaign by signing the petition, but following all the socials for the Raise the campaign, because there are a lot of different things that happen, such as protests, such as being able to sign and contribute to policy documents as well, especially if you've got some area of expertise in this space too. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is in Australia, we've decided to pass a motion that critical race theory in education on all levels is to be denounced and removed. Now, the people who are pushing for this have no idea what critical race theory is, have no idea about racial and ethnic studies at all. Sadly, the only time they can learn about this type of stuff is through doing a subject on it. And even in high schools and primary schools, it's not even taught to begin with. But a lot of academics are having their jobs at jeopardy right now. And a lot of those people are people of color as well, or some of the only people of color academics in some universities. So please do keep an eye out for that in any ways that you can support academics across different universities in Australia whose jobs are at risk, staff members in schools and high school, in primary schools and high schools whose jobs may be at risk as well.
Great, thank you. My cause is the Incarcerated Trans and Gender Diverse Community Fund. This is the national fund to provide financial and material support to trans and gender diverse people who are incarcerated. The fund aims to provide support for trans people in prison and then post-release returning to their communities. There is a GoFundMe. You can just type in Incarcerated Trans and Gender Diverse Community Fund, and also please follow them on Instagram at incarceratedT GD Fund. Transgender diverse people, in particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who have been criminalised, experience structural discrimination and violence that directly impacts upon their access to legal support, stable housing, employment, income, healthcare, and well-being. Overwhelmingly, the majority of trans and gender diverse people who are incarcerated are sister girls and trans women who have been placed in men's prisons. While, no prison is safe, trans women in men's prisons face the daily risk of physical, psychological, and sexual violence. So support for those inside includes, but definitely is not limited to, gender-affirming clothing, toiletries, binders, books, medical expenses. And support for those who are post-release includes, but is not limited to, bond, rental release, emergency accommodation, groceries, clothing, identification, transport, phone, and credit. No prison is safe. Prisons, police should not exist. Abolition is about love and prevention. Supporting these kind of mutual aid organizations is incredibly important, particularly in the move towards that direction. So thank you. It would mean a lot to both of us if you educated yourself on this, and definitely either donate, or if you can't do that, please just share it. Angelica, let's get into it.
All right. So firstly, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sharing your time with us today while we speak on the eternal scam that is grades and motivation. And by grades, we're talking about a lot of different things here. So we've got lots to cover today, but we begin by just wanting to let you all know how we plan to move forward with the podcast. Our ethos here at Similar Differences is that we only want to record when we have the mental capacity and physical ability to do so for subjects that we seriously care about, and we don't want to jeopardize that for the sake of just pumping out content. Increased interest is a bonus, is a plus. Getting media, whatever it is great. It's not the main reason why we do the podcast, but it's mainly to build a community and start discussion and sharing on living experience, emphasizing on the living there. We spend lots of time discussing burnouts and really want to abide by that, to not place added pressure on ourselves to submit to an arbitrary deadline simply to release an episode, and what it means for you to hear the joy and passion in our voices, and you can have confidence that there is something that we really wanted to discuss here in the podcast. So please do follow our Instagram, because that's where we will alert everyone when there is a new episode on the horizon. And sorry, this one.
Now let's do it. Get into it.
Imagine speaking about a podcast about our lived experiences, our pressures, our challenges with burnout, our survival and suffering. And then we do the complete opposite and pressurize ourselves to push out content, to be content creators. No.
Could it be
it's
us?
Not happening. It could never be us. It could never be an as and I. And nor should you expect it. Don't be coming up here being going, where's the nigga? You can ask nicely.
It'll just happen.
It will happen. It will
We're
occur.
not going nowhere. I promise you that. We are going nowhere.
It's as if like the moment you don't do something, we've evaporated. We haven't evaporated. We're here solid in our form as humans. We're not going anywhere. We're not doing anything with the podcast.
Get that capitalist boss out of your brain, bro. We just put it out whenever we want to. And also, let's not pretend that you don't watch a bajillion other pieces of content. There's so much out there. I promise you can come back and have a settle down time with us.
Yes, exactly. So just like, this is not to throw shade to anyone, but it's mainly because we do want to really approach this, and it's good that we acknowledge this, that when you are creating things that you find joy from and you want to actually do seriously, there shouldn't be a pressure for you to do it at this specific time, or to do it when you don't have the mental capacity to do so. We really need to change. We're going to take mental health seriously. Yes, we need to really change that approach. But I'll pass it over to you, Inez.
Thank you. Yes, speaking of intrinsic motivation to do stuff and not focusing on external rewards, today we'll be talking about the biggest scam of the century, grading, and why motivation to get good grades is flawed. First, we will speak on grading, motivation, the contributing factors to quote-unquote success, and finally, grading pressures for expected success. And this is inspired by a YouTube video by Zoe B, which we'll also link in the description. So we have lots to cover, so let's just jump right in. So what is in a grade, really? So educators across sectors argue that grades simply provide a frame of reference for a student standing within a cohort, where they can improve and what they're doing well. And additionally, it's argued that, it holds students accountable to their work. But if you actually think about it, what does a B or like a 75% really tell you? Does it tell you that you aced the entire exam but failed on a major question, or that you aced major questions and failed on smaller ones? Does it tell you that you comprehended the course material or only had to regurgitate it? Maybe you were going through a breakup and couldn't concentrate in finals week. Hell, maybe you were goddamn hungry and just needed to pee during the assessment. And especially during COVID, students who have, reliable technological access, private and comfortable study spaces, few concerns about safety, financial hardship, learning difficulties, or health problems are much less likely to suffer harm to their grades than their peers who lack one or more of these things. And in the midst of the pandemic, then grades are more likely to measure students' relative levels of privilege rather than their learning in a particular course. So traditional grades have long perpetuated inequalities in education, but the pandemic has really exacerbated them. Look, honestly, all that a grade tells you is that you were able to complete a task within a given time frame on a particular day or a few days. There are so many variables at play that a grade often hinders the progress of students. I have a little anecdote here. Getting a good grade depends so much on the course material and your teacher. And if both of that is inherently flawed, you getting a good grade doesn't mean that your work is better or even worse than somebody who just played it safe and stuck to the readings. I know personally for me, I have a lot of readings in my course that are really racist. And I don't want to use them in my assignments. So I try to find other ones that are more applicable and diverse and inclusive. I think that's a better way to go about it. And that is a risk that I take. But so that I'm going above and beyond to find readings that align with the moral values of social work, and I get marked down because I didn't use the recommended readings enough. That means that my writing is good and my paper is good, but the fact that I just didn't use the recommended readings, what does that really say? Please stick to this way, play it safe. And also, what mood was the teacher in when they marked? Had they had a break yet? All of these things also really hinder your ability to get a good grade. We'll discuss what a good grade even means, because honestly, we have that anxiety around a bad grade and what it says about our self-worth as a student, but even as a person. And this anxiety continues to harm academic performance. There was a Pew Research Center's 2018 study that showed academic pressure is the top stressor for teenagers and actually inhibits learning. Who was surprised by that? Another 1996 paper states that requiring students to focus on their performance can actually interfere with their ability to apply creative and apply the course content, and actually suppresses their self-esteem. Another thing is that the lengths that people go to for a good grade often aren't great. And I know that we could all relate, it's pumping that Red Bull, whether it's staying up all night, drinking a shit ton of energy drinks, extra tutoring, people doing performance drugs, even pumping out money into private schools and tuition, bankrupting families in the process, taking out loans to go to a prestigious uni. The list is endless. And I think from this, we have to have a conversation about cheating. Because yes, we can say cheating is quote unquote bad, but if a system is designed to have a good grade, what does that afford you? It ends up affording you financial success, social status, social mobility with better grades. And we have to ask why people even feel the need to cheat in the first place. You may cheat or plagiarize to get a good grade. Now you got it, now what? Huh? What exactly did you learn or apply creatively? You won the prize of upwards mobility, and what now?
So I find cheating to be quite fascinating because there's definitely people who cheat for illegitimate reasons. I'm not going to deny that there are definitely people who just cheat for the sake of. And the process of assessing why someone cheated is also rooted in a lot of biases, especially racial biases as well. There isn't a lot of opportunity to be able to, as a student, be able to explain yourself where you can acknowledge your context and where you're coming from. Because the people that you're explaining it to probably don't care. You get some teachers in academics, or depending whether it's in primary, high school, tertiary, whatever, who do understand because they came through it. They have their own personal shared understanding, but those are very few. How it's approached in the education system, it's suggested that cheating is something that never happens in society. We see cheating happening in the workplace. People cheat their way to get to climb up.
Also, the punishment mindset in education.
It is wild. We need to look at the extent to which that we punish certain groups of students is rooted in ideals or ideas of what punishment should look like for them. Trust me, people think that punishment should look harsher for people of migrant communities. There's this really prominent woman who's the chair of the Harmony Alliance here in Australia who shared about, this expectation of migrants to be grateful for what they've, for being invited into this country or being accepted into this country, and should never really, they're not allowed to address the issues or challenges they have out of fear that you're ungrateful for what Australia has given you. This exact same notion is in this whole cheating education system. Because the moment that you cheat and you're from a community that is routinely marginalized by society, you're not grateful for the fact that we've given you the opportunity for education. You're not grateful for the position that you're in. You're not acknowledging the countless opportunities that Australia is providing you. Not really going into this context of why people are experiencing or have to go to the extent of cheating in the first place.
Exactly.
I've been in that position before where I've thought to myself, is cheating worthwhile? All the pain that I'm suffering trying to get this assessment out, I may as well just copy and paste. What's the point of it? Like I'm like literally like destroying myself. But then you fear this thought that people are going to come back to you and look at you as the ungrateful black girl, like who couldn't get there, and this is why black people shouldn't be allowed to navigate our society and our education system, because they bring it down. This whole notion of bringing the education system down because you cheated.
Embarrassing. Aren't you embarrassed? Gosh.
Exactly.
Educators will continue to deny extensions based on some arbitrary fact. I don't goddamn know. For what reason? Just give the person the extension. What is 1 week gonna do? So if somebody's experiencing illness, maybe doesn't have the access to get a GP letter or to get a letter from the therapist, because those things are not accessible to them, that extension gets denied. So what do you have to do? You have to write an entire paragraph to prove that you need it, and then it gets denied anyway, and that feels demoralizing. And so, yeah, sure, you cheat a little bit. Really, what all people want is just to be able to have what a good grade symbolizes. And what a good grade symbolizes is that you have self-esteem and that you have progressed upwards and that you are deemed the symbol of meritocracy. And honestly, who doesn't want that, And even, look, we're looking at grading, but there actually are some alternatives that have been put forward. So there's, pass fail, there's self-assessment, and there's teacher assessments. There's a range of others, but I'm just going to touch on these for a while. So pass fail might mean that those who have worked really hard might feel left out of the validation that a high mark gives. Let's not try to ignore that, because boy, oh boy, it's that validation that people definitely want. But that's what means that like your self-worth is tied to that. And that is incredibly dangerous. And, people argue that even self-assessment can breed inflation. Oh, everybody's just going to mark themselves so high. Everybody's going to say that they're amazing. Although studies that we have looked at show that often students are likely to be more critical of themselves and mark down instead of up.
Exactly.
I don't know if that is surprising to anybody, because you are hypercritical of yourself.
Isn't it
of course
crazy
they're
how
mark
like
themselves down.
we deny like self-assessment as a legitimate tool. But then as soon as you get into the workplace, the one thing that they ask you to do all the time is self-assessment. They ask you to assess yourself. The interviews that you go through are self-assessment just to get a freaking job. Like concept that we can't be critical of our own work and our own like ability is a bit of a problem. Not the only way, but at least from my experience, when I'm able to assess my ability to do something, that's when I've produced the best work. I feel like there's this idea that when you're in your first year of uni, you're not capable of self-assessment. But when you're in your third year, because you've been through enough of the like university system. I just don't, I find that to be quite a...
Well, until you're beaten down by the educational system.
Exactly, yeah. I find that to be a bit of an issue. I found like one of my experiences this semester was that I was teaching for a little bit, and one of the assessments that we had, students actually had to provide self-assessment and peer assessment. And it was really interesting to see those who actually really go into depth about different things that they want to talk about when you give them the room to.
Absolutely.
And it adds a whole other layer to like how you view the assessment that they just produce. Without that, I feel like so much would have been missed. And I'm wondering to myself, why do we deny, that I think self-assessment, given that there's so much bias, and we'll cover that a little bit later, as a teacher or as a marker or as a assessor. This is where self-assessment becomes really handy.
Absolutely.
But anyway, we'll cover that.
Oh my God, absolutely. I think, teacher assessments are a breeding ground for discrimination and favoritism. I need my accreditation, so I'm not going to be naming no names, but just believe me that it happens to many people in almost every course. And usually it is the people with intersecting identities. and forms of oppression, which is sad, but teachers are human too. And we have to remember that a lot of them are filled with bias as well. So realistically, what do we do? Well, if you truly want an equitable education that allows for diverse learning, you need an environment that actually facilitates learning. You need interactive work. You need group work. You need to allow students to present in different ways as long as they meet like the course criteria. Giving them choice. Once again, with the people in the back, choice. So essay, video, PowerPoint presentation, portfolio, and so much more. And typically in many studies, we have seen that you need in-person holistic, detailed, individualized feedback from a teacher that walks you through areas to improve and what is working well. And self assessments and reflections, as we said before, can definitely help. And it's about facilitating discussion that is constructive, but most importantly, collaborative. Not allowing for all of this choice means that you have a system of punishment for a bad grade, and it does honestly nothing besides impact self esteem and promote unhealthy behaviors to achieve a good grade. I remember nights where I stayed up 2 nights in a row, 3 nights in a row, maybe slept 1 or 2 hours in each, had 2 minute noodles, drinking water whenever I could just to stay alive, functioning on coffee. How's any of that good for your brain? Because I felt like I needed to achieve the best grade and read the most resources, and it did nothing. And then I would feel so drained and awful throughout the week. I just go out and party on the weekend, and you just keep repeating this cycle over and over again. You just try to condense all your incredible work into a week or two, and nobody in like my immediate family had gone to university, so I didn't know all of these, like how to study healthily, how to study with balance, what is a good diet, what is staying up late. All of these things were not taught to me, and were not taught by my education system either. So trying to understand all of these things while also being a high achiever is a recipe for a goddamn disaster. And I think we also have to have maybe a discussion for another day on how much the carceral system impacts schooling and almost every aspect of life. What the fuck is detention? If somebody doesn't have like the right hem for a skirt, you put them in a room that doesn't really conduce to healing. You don't let to talk to anybody. What good does that kind of punishment system do?
So I lived in 2 separate homes.
Yeah.
And you had to have socks at a specific height length.
Yeah.
But I didn't have access to these height lengths of socks when I was at my dad's.
Yeah.
And so I had to come to school one day with my socks shorter. I got detention. I had to recite the whole dress code.
Oh my God.
And I had to write the full thing, 4 fucking pages. And it did nothing but make me cry.
Yeah.
Because I was like, these people don't know the struggle that I go through.
Yeah.
Having to try to you didn't ask me about what the situation was. No one talked to me in the room. I was by myself, one teacher there, just doing their own thing, and they didn't give a shit. The whole notion of detention is it's the fact that it's called
disgusting.
that is so problematic. But
oh yeah, and that it's like prison adjacent, basically.
Yeah.
What it doesn't do anything, and I think we have to have a discussion about how the carceral system literally affects the way that we interact with almost everything, but especially education. The way I think traditional grading is set up in this like very hierarchical, who is the best that'll make it. And I think we've already spoken about this in the meritocracy episode and other episodes. It's hierarchical, but it also follows very similar class and privilege trajectories. Traditional grading, just in general, impacts student self-esteem. It produces stress, relationship conflict. It actually impedes creativity and self-expression. To be able to be creative and self-express, you need risk. You need to be able to fail. And if the risk of you failing is getting yelled at by your parents, not progressing to the next semester, not progressing to a bachelor or an undergrad, you are just going to play it safe. And you do it to get a letter or a number, and it's apparently supposed to define your hierarchical worth as a student. And the problem is that actually does impact your social mobility. So we have to really look at what motivates us to get a really good grade, because I think we should all agree that shouldn't education be expansive and liberating and democratic and facilitate what we all came to school to actually do, which is learn.
Right. So we've talked about grades and much more, and we're going to go into much more depth about that a little later too. But let's move into talking about rewards and motivation, which is attached to this topic as well. So motivation does exist. We know that, but why is the motivation to get a good grade inherently flawed? Well, we have to look at what intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is first. The intrinsic motivation refers to doing something because it's inherently interesting or enjoyable. So
Delightful.
me, I like, yeah, exactly, literally delightful and fun and something that you find. And when we talk about joy, we've talked about happiness in another episode and what joy is. That looks so subjective, right?
Yeah.
So intrinsic motivation can be really subjective. Extrinsic motivation refers to doing something because it leads to a separable external outcome. And grades themselves are a form of this type of motivation, extrinsic. And you're motivated to perform well in school and earn a reward and or to avoid punishment completely. It's what makes students driven, but also completely competitive. And competitiveness itself is something that can be really good and healthy,
absolutely,
but also very, very damaging as well.
Yep.
But learning for the sake of learning is intrinsic motivation. You're motivated to learn for its own sake and personal rewards, your passion for a subject, curiosity, and so much more. And extrinsic motivation can produce short-term results, but that is essentially it. You know, research shows that results of extrinsic motivation are weak and often detrimental in the long term. Constantly getting rewards for accomplishment stands in the way of children, young people becoming independent learners. And the reality is occasional rewards can give an extra boost of motivation, but excessively focusing on them can create these dependencies. And let's be real, we see this in a lot of, like, at least I've seen working in the academic space now and being a researcher now, there's so much dependency on rewards. And in terms of grading, it likely means having your worth and your self-esteem, both positive or negative, tied to a grade. Even giving a gift when your child gets a good grade means, may mean the child sees this as validation for what they've achieved, but can also develop, that validation can develop into this place of, oh, I'm worthy now, or my parents love me, or like I'm appreciated by them.
That hits hard, man. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think constantly getting gifts for like trying to get an A, and then you just get it tied to that, because if your parents also don't pay a whole lot of attention to you outside of you succeeding, that's the only way that maybe you can feel like you can bond with them. And like, what? Yeah. A grade means parental love? What the fuck?
And let's be real, like, we're both women of color here. They say, like, there's always like a meme for Africans, like, you go to your parent, you tell them that you got like a 90. Where's the other 10%?
Absolutely. Oh my God, that joke every day.
Where is the other 10%?
Every day.
Yeah,
where is the other 10%?
And they'll hang up on that, and it's just what? Yeah. So, again, we have to remember that grades are not only grades being determined by someone else. As stated before, grades become university acceptance, scholarships, awards, social status, jobs, money, reduced stress, stability, and further materials of marker of successes. It may not always play out this way, but this is the path trajectory we see and we expect from a consistently high achieving straight A student. Oh my gosh, if you're a straight A student and the moment you go down, boy, oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I feel like maybe you can listen to this and think that, like, oh, we're exaggerating, it's an A, like, whatever. But realistically, think about what a grade actually affords you if you continue to progress. It is university acceptance, it is scholarship, it is money, it is job, it's reduced stress, it's status.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. Psychology is the undergrad that I did, right?
Yeah.
And I think the way that psychology is, the pathway to become a psychologist is a good example of this.
Yeah.
So you've got to maintain a certain grade to get to honors. And usually that's a 75 average.
Yeah.
Even then, very competitive in lots of places. Sometimes you can't even get in into your honors year with an 83. After that, you've got the master's applications. There's so few places, but the expectation, to be honest, is that you've got a high grade. Like it has to be extremely high. But this idea that, okay, someone who's achieved that high of a grade to get into honors, then to get into the master's, is going to be a good psychologist. Trust me, there's some people that I did my undergrad with that I'm very scared.
Absolutely.
I know that they've gotten into that place now and they're doing their masters, and I'm highly scared for the type of people that they are.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I don't want to cuss people out, but it's the reality that there's people getting into professions, climbing up that ladder because of grades, and that's how the system is. It doesn't really allow when you go into masters, you can add a little bit more about personal stuff that you've done. But to be honest, people just write, like, people, this is also a problem. They just get into like positions or do certain work just for the sake of attaching to that grade. And it's so meaningful and quite damaging. I've seen a lot of people who go into working with people with disabilities and doing support work, or just doing lifeline acts, the counseling, just for the sake of getting into masters. Like, there's nothing else attached to it. And there's some people who genuinely do it for good reasons, and that's fine. But unfortunately, I don't think those people are in the majority. The only way to get there is your grade. Like, and there's a lot of people who then, when they don't get into honors, they feel diminished. Like they could never be a psychologist. They're not worthy of being a psychologist. It's not a career. Like you actually genuinely, if you don't get that grade, you have to do undergrad again.
Yeah, that's actually bonkers. That's wild. That's wild. And like, if the DSM, let's talk about the DSM is already horrific in itself. Diagnostic, I was trying to think of it itself, but I couldn't. Diagnostic
statistical manual?
Yeah. I was like, doo-doo shit. Let's okay, stand-up comedy is obviously not my forte. But if your entire curriculum, nationally, state-wise, university-wise, is based on stigma, and most of the readings are white, Western, and you don't get a lot of room to go outside of that, you diverting away from that probably does mean that in some way you want to be more inclusive. At least I would hope so, you know? You want to go above and beyond because you really care about this, but that wouldn't allow for a good grade, because it would just mean you didn't do the recommended reading. You didn't use enough of the recommended reading. Is that really fair?
Oh, it clearly is not. And you know, it's very unfortunate. This is why a lot of careers that are in the way of directly supporting the well-being of people are attached to this notion of extremely high achieving grades with no room for error. You know, continuing on, you know, research has shown that having no external motivators, such as a grade, has a positive effect as it heightens that intrinsic motivation that you have inside. And so when educators emphasize building, creating, developing students' creativity and imagination, it promotes better performance in grades anyway. And decades of research has shown that rewarding someone to complete a task across gender, age, culture, and other variables as well, they actually do worse. But our favorite study is from Princeton, is one from Princeton University about problem solving and competition, in particular about puzzles. So those who were working for a financial incentive took nearly 50% longer to solve a puzzle problem. Another study showed that when children are extrinsically motivated to complete standardized tests and concerned with rewards and approval, use less sophisticated and creative learning strategies, score lower, and are more irritable than children who are interested in learning for its own sake. These students put forth more effort, tackle more challenging tasks, and develop a more profound understanding. Study after study and research after research continues to say this type of information. And yet, here we are discussing the fact that nothing has changed. You know, additionally, when we are rewarded for something we are already intrinsically motivated to do, the reward actually decreases our intrinsic motivation, essentially it destroys that enthusiasm for activities that we actually genuinely enjoy and want to do in our lives. Rewards may devalue behavior and tasks no matter what we think otherwise. If someone has to give you an external motivating factor to complete a task, you would think that there is something inherently wrong with that task. I mean, absolutely. I feel like people need to clock that, like, seriously, like, and going back to the video that we said that we're going to share to you in the episode notes, imagine if someone told you, I'll give you $5 to eat this sandwich. You would think something is wrong with that sandwich. Like, immediately you'd be like, okay.
Oh, so sus.
Like, I mean, I could just eat the sandwich. Why are you giving me $5? Like, I'm hungry. But, so this whole idea, you know, learning becomes less valuable than the grade. Which is really sad. And why would students even want to engage in creative learning when all you need to figure out is how to game the system to get a good grade? It doesn't allow for risks and challenges that inspire creativity, but because all you want to do is play it safe or do exactly what your curriculum and your teacher tells you to, and that's it. Like, you know, your tick box done. So where do we move from this? What do we do? It's easier to offer a steady stream of rewards and punishments to keep students in line. Standardized testing, and grading has an impact on schools and funding, the teacher, and the reputation of the school. To swim against the standardized current right now is extremely hard.
Yep.
Especially given that we've structured our education systems on time restrictions, and you would have understaffed schools. And oh my God, let's not even get into the university sector right now, because it is voluntary redundancies are being pushed everywhere.
Awful.
People are getting mass resignations. Like it's wild. So schools and universities are understaffed, and teachers are flat out burnt out.
Yep.
My appreciation for a lot of people and teachers and academics, I mean, I see it with my mum being a teacher.
Yep.
But also, like, they're extremely burnt out with the constant pressure and preparation that they don't get paid for, have to take out of their own well-being and time.
Oh boy.
Are not getting quote unquote rewarded for. It just, it comes down to the preparation that we allow teachers to have, and also the design of schools and education system at the moment. We need to hit the right balance of academically challenging lessons that inspire that intrinsic motivation, but a school system that is based on pumping out workers and a castle system of punishment doesn't allow this. Yeah, going against the designated curriculum means placing students' jobs and income at risk too. So it is really, really challenging, this whole notion of motivation, grading systems, education, how we move forward. And there are a multitude of factors that contribute to the success of a grade. We have outlined motivation, but there are other things as well that contribute to this too. So we're going to chat about that a bit further.
I think just going back to what Angelica said, we have to remember that school literally started to pump out industrial workers. Having a carceral system of punishment aligns exactly with the values of what that was intended to do. And it still is like that. And it doesn't allow for creativity, choice, diverse needs. You know, I don't know. Has anybody heard this? What am I saying? Who am I speaking to? There's no one else in this room. That, like, you know, it's getting everybody to learn the exact same way as like telling a fish to swim a tree.
Yeah, I know exactly.
I think there's like a picture
exactly
or
what you're
something.
talking about.
Oh man, but it's true. It's like you can't expect everybody to align with the way stuff is taught in school. And like, yes, you can have academic rigor, but a lot of that is like, quite frankly, just like pounded into you so that you can be like, you don't care about anything else besides school. And like, this is all I care about. And I want to be a high achieving student. And like, we're both very lucky that the school system seems to align with us and we do well, but that doesn't mean it doesn't come without its challenges. The factors that actually contribute to success, the learning style, does this school actually suit you and your needs? People with like different learning abilities, whether it is like neurodivergent issues or disabilities, not being able to have access to equitable learning styles of education. How is pushing somebody to keep trying to assimilate into like normal standardized learning? That's not going to do anything for anybody. It'll just make the person feel shit about themselves.
There's something I wanted to touch on in particular when it comes to like factors that impact, success and grade success, and that is the extent to which family is involved.
Oh boy.
And parental involvement as well. I was like I just mentioned, like my family's tree structure is a wild, complicated mess. But one of the things that was really crazy for me is, and it has contributed to a lot of my challenges that I've experienced, is that because it was instilled in me that the less involved my parents were, and if I achieved a good grade, that was even greater. You know what I mean? Like I had to have no involvement.
Oh, absolutely.
For there to be success. And that actually has contributed to a lot of challenges in other areas of life, where I've thought I have to do independent all the time. And that support network around achieving or being motivated to do something or to get to where I want to is just not there. And
you're a little girl boss.
literally,
I'm a girl boss.
I was navigating girl boss life for years. And it's just, and also like the involvement of, I guess, parents who see failure is not possible when we're failing so many things in life, like all the time, like on a daily. Like,
absolutely.
That
you have to give your children grace to fail. How else will they learn?
And it's unfortunate that we we're not parents, but we see it as being kids who've had have had a big fear of failure. when it comes to academics. And like, I know even now, if I was to fail, like, this next portion of my degree, my God, I would probably, like, it would shatter me, and I would think of, I don't know how I'd be able to navigate like the rest of like working life after that. That is also a big marker of like where we put our emphasis on success. Like, we're trying to prove something to them. We're trying to prove that all their efforts that they made in coming to this country is worth it.
Yeah.
So there's no room for failure, so to speak.
Yeah. But you came here so that, like, we could have the choice to also do something the way that we want to. But that's also like, you feel like you have a debt to your parents, but you also come here and you want to make the most of that opportunity. But it's unbelievably difficult to have that burden on you, particularly as eldest daughters. Oh, every eldest daughter in any household deserves $1 million.
I feel like all eldest daughters should just have a day where they collectively scream, and then they just like all
like
of
a big harmony.
Big harmony.
That's the Harmony Alliance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, definitely parental involvement is a big one, but also just like a sense of belonging at school. Because like, maybe if like your family situation may not be fantastic, you come to school and like, you're at school constantly, you're around these people all the time. If you don't feel like you belong there, just in a simple way, like, you don't feel like you really click with anybody, you kind of want to keep to yourself. But on the other end, where it's like you are one of very few people of color, or maybe you get bullied at school, which is unbelievably common, and I can't believe there's still more after all these years to circumvent that. But not having a sense of belonging or a peer support group, it'll make your experience at school incredibly difficult. Because I was reflecting on like, okay, what do I even like about university? Because I want to do my course. I care about social work. I care about social work values. This course is not great, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And the things that I care about and the things that I've gotten the most joy out of, even in like shitty workplaces, like university courses that aren't great, what really gets you through is like the peer support that you actually get. You have people who align with your values that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can network with, and that is what propels you into having a better time at uni. And it also like kind of holds everybody accountable, and you get to have more diversity. You would hope so, like different ideas. Distinctly remember just like not doing well in certain areas of my life because I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't want to come to school.
I think this connects a little bit to recent experiences that we've had this past year and a half with COVID. COVID obviously has impacted a lot of us in terms of education. And for myself, I started my master's, and you've started your master's as well within a pandemic. And I remember last year.
We did that.
yeah. Last year was wild because this idea of I have not touched my university campus. I've only touched it twice. Like, I don't know. Wow. I could literally be a student of any university because I have not been on the campus at all. Like, one of the issues I had was obviously that came with a lot of like a reduced sense of belonging. I'm really lucky because the subjects that I did, I don't know what it was. I was really amazed by the difference in teaching.
And, that's amazing.
And approach.
What the hell?
Like, no, honestly, this is the thing that I want to get in touch into the next section is like the fact that I was surprised is a problem.
That is surprising.
Like oh my God, there's people who, I had lecturers who were like, look, the date of submission for all the marks is then. To be honest, if you get your marks to us by that date, that's fine. They just did not, like, when it came to extensions or like,
incredible.
Just tell us we give you the extension, like, just like, or they'll just even add an extra week. Like, and I know like a lot of people were doing that because COVID was like wild, but they just knew like the system was just not conducive for learning this in this type of way that it makes you feel like this pressure to perform in the midst of a pandemic.
A panorama?
Like,
in a panini. It's the pressure to perform is ridiculous. You can't do that.
And because there also is, like, especially for those who just started, like in the middle of the pandemic, starting their masters, like you have no connection to anything. So how can you feel somewhat connected to all these deadlines and pressures that you've got to do to perform? But there were some horror stories of people, teachers and stuff, to say, well, guess what? I have kids.
And so you probably also have a dual income household. My roommate is not my partner that I can rely on for emotional support or income. What?
And
That is
like I
ridiculous.
it's just this whole idea of like comparing situations and like not being able to understand. They were like, even the leaps and bounds that I had to jump through to so like I had a family member pass away during last year, and my grandfather, and I put like a special consideration in, and I was speaking to someone on the phone, and they were like, make sure you mention that they're your maternal grandfather. I'm like, why is that important? They're like, oh, so given like COVID and all the things that have been happening, like a lot of people have been passing away, we need the specifics, otherwise we can't
What?
pursue further. And I'm like,
What the hell is going on?
Like meanwhile I'm stressing because I'm like, I don't want to fucking fail. Like I don't want to, like, and because I have this internalized fear of what happened to me in undergrad, that I'm like, and I don't want to disappoint my parents. I don't think everyone's expecting me to do well in this master's course. Like I have to succeed exceptionally more as being a Black girl. So I'm thinking, oh my God, like I'm trying to like get support so I can just have a bit of break so I can do this assessment.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, these people are telling me, go and get this statutory declaration signed because we need to have proof of your maternal. I'm like, I'm not going to get a death certificate from Nigeria. What does that mean?
Exactly.
If I go and call my family in Nigeria, can you provide me a death certificate? They'll be like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
and
that's so harsh.
For me, I feel like that circumstance wasn't as bad as some of the other things that I was experiencing. They were flat out people who were getting messages and emails from not just their teachers, but like other people in like the universities that will be like, well, if you can't perform at this level, how do you expect to survive in the workplace? Did we ask for the pandemic to come? Did we ask for like, and I'm like, what, like this,
that access to that documentation is like, oh, that's just like a given right. It's so easy for everybody to get. Not everybody is in Australia. Not everybody has access to different professionals, let alone at the time when you are grieving, when you need to like be a different role in a family and support your own grieving and try to support other people, financial costs. I understand the need for that documentation, but it is not a God-given right that is going to be provided to you easily.
Yes, we like that documentation is necessary in some regards, but your approaches to how you talk to students and how you talk to people who are trying to balance this idea of, oh my God, they're going to get a fail, to like, I know I can do this, but I just need someone to understand. People just don't give enough grace and give enough guidance as to how to walk through that. Even when you get something approved, it's like, that's it, you're still left on your own. Where is the support to still achieve the success that you want to achieve? You have to seek it out yourself. If we change the way that we go about things, we definitely can support people to still achieve what they want to, but not have to destroy themselves. Like even in a pandemic, I was able to achieve, I don't know, a 3.9 out of 4 GPA or a 6.
Hell yeah, GPA. Woo.
Yeah, and like that's fantastic. But at the same time, I just fear for those people who they could have gotten that if they wanted, and but because of something that happened and people saying, oh, because we all were in it, we all experienced the same thing, so just because you couldn't achieve this, like you almost feel like diminished. Like
people need to stop saying also that COVID is over. COVID is not over. COVID is over for places that has high rates of vaccination, which are predominantly countries that colonized other countries. And COVID will not be over for many countries until for like 5-10 years. Okay, it is going to continue to impact people, and just because you don't see it in your direct vicinity anymore doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
A matter of letting people not feel this stress of a deadline, knowing that when they leave for their careers to do whatever they're going to do, deadlines get extended. So besides motivation, another contributing factor to success is also socioeconomic status. So the class that you are currently or have transitioned up and down from, it changes for a lot of people, but I know for myself, socioeconomic status had a big part on my ideas about what success meant, and how necessary I thought it was to achieve a certain grade, because I attached grades as the marker for being able to escape from the circumstances that I was in, to achieve a greater status,
protective factor.
And when I realize it now, I'm like, the grade alone doesn't mean shit. Like, and, there's a lot of other contributing factors that quote unquote make me be successful in my world, or how I define that. But I saw, this idea of moving up in class as, and also seeing like the impact of being socioeconomically disadvantaged, the impact of that on my family. I wanted to make sure that I did everything I could to break out of that, that mold, or be that person who isn't the stereotype that is attached to that. When I wouldn't get a certain grade, I would almost feel like, oh, I'm validating what people say about people who live out in Western Sydney, or people who come from a specific family structure. But also, that's one aspect of socioeconomic status. The other aspect is actually the amount of money that I had to be able to navigate anything to do with school was tremendously low. Like tremendously low. Like, being a carer, also trying to not being able to have the time to work as much. But even when I did, like that, all going to different places, like to buy the textbooks or to have the money to go on transports to get to uni, it was sometimes not there at all. And it felt really like no one understood what it meant to really like achieving like a good grade. Like I just had so many barriers in terms of money. I'm not going to name who this person is, but I see this person in my life who has achieved fantastic grades, like highest GPA that I personally know of anyone, and people celebrating that. I look at them and then I look at myself and I go, well, how come I can't be like that? But then I remember, like, hang on, this person is living a very privileged ass life, literally minimal responsibilities, can afford to do whatever because the parents have the money. Yet my success is compared to their success, and apparently we should be on the same level because we're doing the same subject.
Absolutely not.
It's not. We seriously can't underestimate how much of a contributing factor your economic status has in that aspect, but also the other aspect of like you wanting to break out of that, be closer to some kind of stability because you've achieved a higher grade. And maybe that means better work for you in the future. Like even now, for example, I've been thinking a lot about my future, and like being in academia, I keep thinking about these extrinsic motivations that will supposedly put me in a bracket later on in life that will bring in a higher sort of income so I can move away from where I've been for years. That pressure and that idea has been quite toxic. And I think when you add gender as well, and these ideas that I have for life or what I want things to look like, and to be able to support my family too, influence of finances is so big.
I think we also have to analyze, like, as we've spoken about before, how much of a reward is it? Is it really a reward? Because really what we're trying to aim for is having a standard of living that is comfortable. Is that really a reward if you have to earn a living? I hate that term. Earn a living. We already deserve a living from the notion of just being born.
Exactly.
Exactly. But it's like the socioeconomic status can definitely impact so much, right? You can have lack of access to technology, lack of access to extra tutoring. That definitely can have an impact.
Tutoring. Oh my, I used to sit, sorry to cut you off, but I used to sit in high school jealous of every Tom, Dick and Harry that was going, I have tutoring this afternoon, and I'd be like, oh, I wish I had tutoring.
Yeah, exactly.
And trust me, that's why I pushed so hard to like be the best of the best with my mark. The moment that we got to like HSC and everyone's getting like tutoring to get into medicine, tutoring to get 99.95, tutoring, like I just couldn't, like, it was very overwhelming. Anyway.
And I think a lot of that comes into a lot of the stuff that I think about, particularly in child protection, is that a lot of the things that are associated with neglect are honestly associated with experiencing poverty. Not being able to be there for your children to have like an extreme parental involvement also means that you just need to survive under capitalism. Intersecting forms of oppression that socioeconomic status also brings, a lot of the time just means, you know, negative impacts on your mental health, on your actual physical body, additional trauma, not being able to have a safe home environment. And this occurs absolutely on every single socioeconomic status, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, you know, the ones that are higher up in the socioeconomic ladder, that they don't have extra time and ability to put into their children's education, which does definitely impact a grade. But then on top of that, like the very basic things of like basic safe housing, right? One barrier. Second barrier, food. being able to have healthy, nutritious food that serves your brain well, being able to sleep in a safe house. I have had problems with sleeping for my entire life. And it is mainly because I had to be in a state of hypervigilance constantly because I'd be like, I don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen at night. Okay. And I have to stay awake and having to come to school with like an array of mental illness, restricted food because like I had eating disorder because I just thought that like this is the only way that I can control my situation, and then not being able to sleep. Like how does any of this facilitate a safe environment, you know? And it just impacts your self-esteem. You're not able to practice. You don't have personal goals for yourself because you're like, well, not always. I'm speaking from my experience, but like all I think about is like I just want to be alive tomorrow. Okay. And I just like, sure, a good grade is fine. I just like, if I even make it to school that day, that is a champion in itself. What personal values, goals do I have about seeing myself? Where do I see myself in 5 years? Honestly, dead. That's what I saw myself in 5 years. What kind of impact does it have on your self-esteem, on your personal values and goals? If you can't even see yourself graduating or coming out of your family situation alive, how does that impact my ability to be a good student? It's amazing that I still wanted to learn and I really cared about it, and that's wonderful. But what about everybody else that can't? And people shouldn't feel shit about that, because trying to succeed from all of that and building resilience, fuck resilience, man. I don't want resilience. None of us should have ever had to be strong. These things should have afforded to us by school, by lots of social services. You know, like, yes, we can be here and symbols of like, look, we got through it and whatever. But truthfully, if people don't and they can't get a good grade, that doesn't have any factor on your self-worth. I think that's the most important thing to remember, is that a grade does not define your worth. I know that for the rest of my degree, I'm probably going to get bad grades because I'm not going to be aligning with the recommended readings. Does that mean that I'm going to be a terrible social worker? No.
And I think I wanted to touch on like a bit of like the food thing as well, because the reality was couldn't get access to those. I had a joke with my boyfriend who drinks like water like a camel, like he just drinks water every second.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started dating, he would like encourage me to drink more, and I'm like even just getting a bottle was shit hard, because like it just anything extra to buy was just challenging in the house full of many. And I'm like, I'm glad you have access to that. I can't afford just in the little things like that. People wouldn't even realize how much of a hard task it is to actually keep up with a good standard of health and well-being, like physically.
Absolutely.
And just to be in the right space to perform or to do well. I would much rather sacrifice like buying water instead buy that Red Bull that will keep me awake. And people take this type of stuff as not important or significant to this, but it very much is, especially when you're in environments or homes where you don't have access to things as readily, or it's not a safe environment at all for you to get this stuff that you need nutritionally. Just because that person who had a somewhat similar experience was able to get there should never be said to someone else who is in a similar situation. Absolutely. And put as an expectation for them to succeed just like that. I'm not them. I'm not Sally.
Exactly. I think often we forget that like trauma is actually a reaction to an event, not the event itself.
Exactly.
So people, obviously, there are negative impacts for abuse and unsafe home environments, and people can repress that and still survive, but other people feel it immediately, and then it just feels like in their entire neither response is bad or worse. One just might facilitate more productive learning environments, you know? And also, I think the last thing we'll just touch on here is the actual schooling environment itself. Having a course or a teacher or a classroom that is committed to like inclusion, diversity, individuality, and has like an anti-racist curriculum and is culturally safe to be there. Having that strong relationship with the teacher and the school means the absolute world. You want to go. It's everything. It's like being able to have that relationship and get that individualized feedback that we all know is incredibly important really means that you have somebody rooting for you in your corner and have somebody who believes in you. And that does so much for your grade. It does so much for your sense of belonging. Even if maybe you don't feel like you belong in your cohort or at home, having at least one teacher that believes in you. Why is it always the English and the art teachers, man? Always. I don't know what it is. I feel like everybody I know who has a favorite teacher, it's always the English or the art teacher. And I think that those specific relationships are so important. But you have a school or teachers that don't believe in you. Again, why are you going to want to come to school? You know, biases are going to leak through teachers because they're people. with all of those, there are absolutely so many barriers to success.
Mm.
And hopefully this gives you time to reflect on what like your schooling experience has been like, what it is currently like. Also just providing a little bit more empathy for people around you and knowing that the school system is designed for some and not all. Angelica, you just take it away. There's so much to say.
I would constantly look at my grade. Like I even remember from primary school having this competition with this other guy. We ended up being school captains together, which is kind of cute. Like
that's cute.
He was really sweet. I would have competitions all the time to, you know, who got like full marks in like the math sheet that we'd get in like year 6. Like if I didn't beat him, just beat everyone. That was a problem for me. Like I couldn't live like that. That was just how I was. Always intensely looking at my grade, not just because I wanted to have a good grade, but goes back to that point of value and validation. I was looking to determine whether my value was worth it or not to society, to my family, friends, people around me. Feel like all their toils were worth it. All their efforts were worth it. And you know, as a woman of color, like that expectation to perform, it's like if you don't perform, everyone in this universe is coming for you. The racists are going to come for you to tell you like you didn't do well enough, get out of our country, you're bringing us down. Your community will come for you. You're not doing well enough, you're not representing us well, you're diminishing our value, people are going to look at us negatively. Boom, like your ancestors even like you feel guilty that like all the suffering that they went through is not worth it, and your parents, your next door neighbor's dog, everyone is angry at you.
Your next door neighbor's dog, not Milo.
Like,
not Milo.
So anyway, so you're this idea of being the talented person, right? The talented Black woman. Like the grading system, if you don't perform well, your talent is considered, you don't have any, like you're not good at what you do. And like that scholarship you want, that opportunity that you want to get, it's all reliant on how immaculate your grades are. But there's no room for error. And you know, I want to bring this back to this the notion of expected performance way back when you know, IQ and all of that, those types of assessments were brought in years ago, in particular during, you know, slavery, which still, issues of slavery are still occurring. But for Black populations, where it was determined that Black population groups have a lower IQ inherently because of like their genetic composition, which I think is madness. that was even you know, projected, but that actually
that's bonkers.
That's actually where you see a lot of academic papers from way back when, you know, in the 19s, whatever, you know, when there was a lot of research into psychological assessment and IQ that puts, Black identities as not being educated, not having a high IQ because of their animalistic traits. And that has fed into also our grading system. Trust me, if you think that your blind marking is truly blind marking, don't be out here thinking like, I'm colorblind when I mark. No, your biases are inherently there because that's how the structure has been put.
And don't think anybody is off the hook just because they're women of color or people of color. Okay,
exactly.
You hopefully you've all worked through it, but the society is set up to discriminate against Black people, against First Nations people, and even in like particular ethnicities, there's like the model minority. Your proximity to whiteness and light skin definitely has an impact. Okay, so the communities, some communities I know are fully anti-Black. Just because you're a woman of color does not mean you don't contribute to that shit, because of course you do. Just because you belong to a group that is marginalized doesn't mean that you don't have that within you, because you do. That's all I'm going to say.
Exactly. No, that's such a big important point, because when I think about the pressure to perform, I would try to perform so I avoid one, not just punishment, but or a lower grade, but to avoid having to plead to a professor like about a grade, because you already know what's going to come. You already know that they have that bias there. And this is to white professors, people of color, all of them. Like all of them, just the fact that you have to plead to someone who could potentially go, well, you should be able to perform. Or if it is a academic who's a person of color, they'll be like, look at me.
Yep.
Trust me, I had that. I actually had someone who was like, I was able to achieve this. Look at where I am. So why couldn't you achieve this one assessment? Meanwhile, I was fighting the most wildest situations that were happening at home. Like we've said, there are these biases, unconscious bias and conscious bias. Like, I think there's so many things that we are very conscious of. Very, very conscious of.
I don't know how it and unconscious bias is unconscious. I feel like a lot of the time that's just
it's
an excuse.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm gonna throw hands, but 100%. Whatever. For sure.
No.
Oh, it's unconscious. It's in my brain. It's just there. It doesn't mean you don't have to do the work to undo it. Or
exactly.
that you have to critically reflect and constantly be bettering yourself. There's no way that you just wake up one day and you're like, I am woke now. Like, what the fuck?
We all know racism exists, and then we keep attaching it to unconscious bias. But we've just established that it exists, and we all know it exists. So what is unconscious? Like, tell me what the unconscious bit is. Acknowledging your privilege. Like, you already know that you don't experience racism, so you already know. Like, that's very front of mind.
Absolutely.
Like, I never understand
having the discourse go from anti-racist, which is very active, continuous, lifelong, uncomfortable most of the time, to moving it to decolonize almost feels somewhat not passive, but it just feels like, okay, we'll just give it back and we'll try to undo some of the damage that we've done. And I feel like that's almost like sometimes an easier term for people to deal with.
It's not even sometimes, it is. And even when we talk about the education system and decolonizing the education system, people are still confused as to what they say it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Tell us what you mean. You know, what does active anti-racism look like in the education system? Because you're not prepared to talk about that.
No,
but you're here championing.
Absolutely, both go hand in hand. I'm not saying one is more active or one passive than the other. I think I'm just trying to explain that, like, the way it's been co-opted and perceived feels like one is uncomfortable because it's active, and one is just like, okay, it's just a thing that we have to do. It's like, no, both of the things we have to do continuously, and both of these should be active and passionate and, you know, not speaking over people and actually listening to others.
Exactly.
But it's just the uncomfortableness with anti-racism. I don't know. That's for another time. What is that about?
I've seen, so there are some things like right now that I've seen, and I think we've touched on this before, like, you know, there are biases that we have and that a lot of the education system has, you know, on students who write neatly, or students who submit their appeals on time, or students who always talk in class. Like, you know, for a fact that when you go to grade, you're going to change the way that you do things a little bit, even substantially or a little bit, because that bias is there. But even more so, we need to really acknowledge the way that stereotypes about specific groups and people poses a threat to the way that we perceive and continue this current grading system that we have. The moment that you see that one Black person or that one Indian student doing just one thing wrong, it will stick with you. Because it will stick with you, and it will impact the way that you go about your marking or go about your assessment and your grading.
If you are in like a class of like predominantly white people, you are most of the time invisible until it comes to a question about culture. Then you're hyper visible. Then everybody wants you to be a goddamn spokesperson.
Yeah, everyone wants you to speak. They will look at you. If you're in face-to-face class, they'll look at you waiting for your response.
I don't know. Do you know? Like, fuck off. People are invisible until they have a point of living experience, not insight or education or knowledge or anything else you want to attribute to us. But it's just, you're culture woman, culture man, culture person, you know?
Yeah. It's exhausting. It's actually quite exhausting. I was just about to say, it is very exhausting. And, you know, I find, speak on the topic of exhaustion, felt, you know, and it only clicked until I started like my course last year, that I started to breathe a sigh of relief every time I had someone who was of a specific ethnic background, like teaching me. I would be like, oh,
absolutely.
And I didn't know why. It didn't click to me why I just inherently felt like this immediate comfortability.
Yeah.
Knowing that still, like you just said, we have a lot of issues with our proximity to whiteness, our, you know, the way that we uphold these systems that negatively impact all of us. But I would still, I never clocked like the sigh of relief that I had when I had like a PhD academic teaching me.
Yeah.
And I think it became apparent because I almost felt like maybe the pressure to perform would be a little bit less hard or if I had to explain myself later on to them, they would be more accepting. That's the perception that I had in my mind.
Yeah.
And I feel like that speaks a lot to the pressures and the fears that we kind of carry in the classroom, whether it's in primary, secondary, or tertiary education. This fear of disappointing as well. I almost felt like, for example, I had like a Nigerian academic, man, I did not want to disappoint him at all. Like I was like, I have to do well.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, not just for like I just felt like this, okay, I feel like I feel less intimidated, but and we'd be a bit more supported, but I feel like I still need to perform to prove to him that, you know, like
that's absolutely true.
It's strange how this whole system works. If there's one thing that I find has contributed a lot to the anxiety issues that I've had, it's this fear of failure. And your performance will not come with failure, it will always come with success. I think that's wild to think that anyone will always have success all the time. And it's really scary the extent to which that failure can manifest in different parts of your life. In the relationships that you have with people. I've noticed the relationships that I have with people who are older than me, who are much more older. I don't want to fail in front of them. I'm more comfortable failing with people around me that are like my age, but I don't want to appear as not achieving a certain thing in front of those who are my eldest. An issue that is reinforced in the pressures that we carry in the education system.
I think success inherently as it is can't be success without failure. You need both of those to exist, and you need to be able to fail, to take risks, to be creative with your learning, and to learn from them. Because I think about everything in my life where I've learned the most, and it has absolutely been where I've failed the most. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, you know? Maybe it's just like, oh God, I just want to be better next time. And you're like holding on to that feeling. But it is true. You end up learning more how to take risks and challenge the status quo, and how else to contribute information to an assignment that maybe isn't conventional. And I feel like those risks should absolutely be rewarded. And even if they don't meet the marking criteria or something, that effort should be commended, you know? And I feel like it's just not enough. And as we said before, why would anybody take risks in education if literally your livelihood depends on it? It can mean self-worth and social mobility and breaking the generational trauma curse, but also it has more detrimental impacts. You know, if somebody doesn't finish even high school, you know, the standard of success and the entry levels for positions are just getting higher and higher and higher. The cost of living is going up. A grade is not just a grade anymore. Can be the determining factor to how much you make and how comfortable of a life that you can have. And that should never be allowed. And I think that that's an inherent flaw in the system. You know, even international students, if they don't end up doing well, the amount of money, the visa, everything else that gets into it, the pressure that is put on them is insane. They're, you know, people with different learning abilities, not being able to succeed. There's just so many barriers, you know? And I think today, discussion has facilitated some discussion within yourself or within your peers, people around you, about grading, rewards, and motivation. And most importantly, that your worth is not tied to a grade. And we all have a unique ability that should be nurtured. And sometimes standardized testing schooling simply just does not do that. And I think that's a flaw. I think we have a almost carceral level of system of education, and it doesn't facilitate growth. And I think we definitely have to make steps towards allowing for that to happen. But yeah, I think that ends it for today's episode. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We definitely do appreciate it. And it would mean the whole world to us if you could share this episode and follow us on Instagram for further updates. We always welcome and encourage discussion, so please send it our way. What we say is not gospel. We are just having a discussion here, and we want to have a discussion with our community and our listeners. We hope you all have a beautiful day, and please stay tuned for the next episode. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.